Welcome, everyone, and I'm so excited and happy to welcome you all to Neuro Across the Diaspora, an amazing panel as part of Black and Neuro Week 2026. My name is Ebony Monet Arnold, and I am a PhD candidate in biological and biomedical sciences at Harvard University, Boston Children's Hospital. I am thrilled to be co-moderating today's discussion alongside Betty, who will introduce herself and this event in just a moment. Before we introduce our panelists, we have some quick announcements to make. Live ASL interpretation and automatic closed captioning is enabled in this Zoom webinar. You can choose to view or hide closed captions by clicking the live transcript or show captions button. If you have issues accessing these captions, please message the ghost moderator in the chat or in the Q&A. We are all joining this talk from around the world, and I am joining you today from the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket peoples, Indigenous people who have stewarded these lands for many generations. I invite all of us to take a moment to reflect on the lands you are joining from, your relationship to those lands, and the Indigenous peoples who have lived and continue to inhabit them. Additionally, we encourage you all to visit our website and register to become a member of Black in Neuro. It is completely free. And now I will pass the mic to Betty to introduce herself and give a quick overview of today's event.
Thank you, Ebony. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Neuro Across the Diaspora 2026. My name is Betty Bakela, and I'm a PhD candidate in neuroscience at Emory University. It's my pleasure to serve as your moderator for today's discussion. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia, on the ancestral homelands of the Muskogee people. Today's panel celebrates something that makes neuroscience so exciting. It's a global community of scientists, including myself, scientists across countries, cultures, and continents to pursue neuroscience. Today, we're bringing together an outstanding group of neuroscientists from around the world who have built careers across different countries, institutions, and disciplines. And together, we'll discuss how their international experiences have influenced their scientific journeys and explore ways that we can strengthen research capacity across the diaspora. Whether you're a student considering opportunities abroad, an early career researcher navigating your next steps, or an established scientist interested in fostering international partnerships, we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling inspired, connected, and empowered. I would also like to shout out our moderators who are monitoring the chat today, Kendall Nicholas and Peace Olenarian. Please feel free to submit questions and comments as they come up for you throughout the session. And with that, I will have Ebony introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Betty. We have 5 outstanding speakers on our panel today, and I'll read a quick bio for each of them. First off, we have Dr. Natasha Muwa-Nigwa. She is a Zimbabwean neuroscientist, public engagement leader, and advocate for equity and representation in dementia research. She is currently an Alzheimer's Research UK Fellow at the UK Dementia Research Institute, University College London, investigating the molecular mechanisms underlying Alzheimer's and related dementias. Alongside her research, she leads Mindful Conversations, an award-winning public engagement project bringing dementia awareness to Black heritage communities. And next, we have Dr. Thomas Tego. He is a neuroscientist and physiology lecturer at the University of Ghana, where his enrichment lab explores how experience shapes brain plasticity through environmental enrichment models for depression and autism. Trained at the University of Leicester, he established Ghana's first electrophysiology lab and co-founded GH Scientific, a scientific communication NGO, championing science communication across Africa. He is a Ghana Neuroscience Society and Ghana Young Academy leader, passionate about mentoring the next generation of African neuroscientists. Our third panelist today is Dr. Odisaya Okiki-Oluwa, an MD and a physician from Jos, Nigeria, and an incoming postdoctoral research fellow in the Radis Lab at St. Michael's Hospital, Unity Health, Toronto. Summa cum laude class valedictorian at All Saints University School of Medicine. His training spanned Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, England, and the United States. He has published in Neuro-Oncology Advances in World Neurosurgery, presented at CNS and AANS, and served on pediatric neurosurgery missions with the World Pediatric Project. He aspires to train in and advance equitable neurosurgical care across Nigeria and the Caribbean. Our fourth panelist is Dr. Chi Ode Momo, and she is a translational neuroscientist advancing equitable approaches to dementia prediction, prevention, and precision brain health. She is an associate professor at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, where she leads U plus M equals Brain Global Health Hub, and head of the Multiomics and Biomarker Lab at Aga Khan University. She is a chief investigator of Africa Fingers and co-leads the Female Brain and Endocrine Health Consortium and develops culturally adapted biomarker-driven strategies to reduce brain health inequities across Africa and globally. And our last panelist for today is Marilyn Ogulola. She is a master's in science student in cell biology and genetics, zoology department at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. Her research focuses on molecular basis of epilepsy and neurodevelopmental disorders. As education and capacity development lead too at CogSay Africa, she supports young African researchers in learning. Marilyn cares about the ethical use of African brain data and believes the future of African research will be built by Africans working together, solving the continent's own health challenges. And with all of that being said, I welcome all of our panel members, and I'm going to kick us off with our first question. I'll start with Natasha. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into neuroscience? What first sparked your interest in the brain, and what experiences shaped the path that you are on today?
Thank you so much, Ebony, for the question, and thank you, Black in Neuro, for this invitation and such an inspiring panel. So I'm really keen to hear their answers. But for me, I sort of stumbled into research more generally. I thought I was going to do medicine, and because I'm from Zimbabwe, when you like biology, that's what you did back in the day. So I did a human biology undergrad at Cyprus, thinking I was doing that as a pre-med with the hopes of then going to med school. But then I had a chance to do a lab project and I just fell in love with being in the lab. I loved the process of research. So that was just me getting into research. But then the neuroscience part came in from quite a personal experience that my mom has quite complex and severe mental health issues. And I had had that experience since I was 12 years old, seeing her struggle with this. So I was always interested in the brain and what happens when what's going on when things go wrong in the brain. So that was what kind of inspired me to go, okay, I really like research. I'm really interested in understanding the brain due to this personal experience. So I pivoted, went into research, did my master's in the Netherlands in molecular mechanisms of disease. And there I got to do two internships, and they were both on stem cell modeling of neurological diseases. And that just kind of, it fell in love just more broadly with using different models to understand the brain. And then from there, had the opportunity to then do a PhD in Parkinson's disease, furthering using stem cell models. And then with Parkinson's, I got into the field of neurodegeneration, got really interested in dementia, then applied for a postdoc now where I am at UCL, where I'm working in Alzheimer's disease and dementia research. So it's kind of like it started from a personal place, not really sure what I wanted to do, pivoting into research, and then through my personal experiences going into neuroscience, and then just falling in love as I learned more and more about different topics. So that's kind of how I stumbled my way now into doing dementia research, which, yeah, this is definitely one of my passions now.
All right, thank you for sharing. And we're going to ask the same question for Thomas.
Right, that's great, and thank you, everyone, once again. Great story from Natasha, which in our case a very stark contrast to mine because I wanted to run away from medicine. It felt like it was too much to prepare. For all the other degrees, you can just apply and roll up. Medicine, you have to show all these extra stuff you are doing outside of academia. But then I also did a human biological sciences degree as an undergraduate. And during that degree, the ones I found most interesting were our courses around genetics, and then our courses around neuroscience. You know, it was just fascinating to think about the both genetics and neuroscience holds that potential to really influence who we are, like just fully, right? And that's exciting to understand. However, it's at this point that I always then weigh out how the story progresses because as is expected it to be, I had a calling for neuroscience. It was more, I love genetics, I love neuroscience. My grades were better in neuroscience, so I pursued neuroscience, and then managed to do a PhD in neuroscience, and really the interest just went on from there. Just the ability of being able to modulate our understanding of the world through experiences. So we started out first looking at sensory experiences, how that changes brain function. And then after finishing that at the University of Leicester, I'm back in Ghana now, and that's what I'm really doing work around how environmental factors can just influence experiences, because I think it holds just great promise to be able to modulate brain function in health and disease. And yeah, we now stick that flag in. This is it. Yeah.
All right, and now I'll pass it on to Odisaya.
Yes. Okay. Thank you all very much. First of all, thank you, Black in Neuro, for the invite, and thank you to Dr. Tahoe and Dr. Natasha for the beautiful stories. I would say my journey to neuroscience started from an early age. I actually went to a special ed school in my early formative years, so I had a lot of friends who were mute and non-verbal, so I had to learn how to communicate in sign language, just so I could relate with them. And to me, they were just my friends, people with autism, Down syndrome, and you play with them, you relate to them as the same type of people, and you step out of that controlled environment and you see how society treats some of them. So unfortunately, that lit a spark in me that I was going to, try and advocate for individuals living with such conditions. And then when I got into high school, I wasn't doing so well academically, and I read the story of a neurosurgeon called Ben Carson, and he was in kind of a similar situation as myself, and eventually he worked twice as hard as everyone, and he became a neurosurgeon. So from the age of 12, I read that book and I decided that this is what I was going to do with my life and my career. Fortunately, 4 years after that, from struggling, I graduated as class valedictorian, and I just continued that journey. In med school, the path was a bit similar because I was already interested in neurosurgery. I found neuroanatomy very interesting, but I think the day that definitely solidified it was the first case I saw, like seeing the brain alive and pulsating. I can say that I definitely fell in love from that first day. And throughout med school, I've been very fortunate. I was able to spend time rotating in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, see how neurosurgery was done. And then I went to England for about 3 months, spent time with my mentor there. And then I was in the US last year, completing a bunch of rotations. And I think that firsthand, I've seen the disparity that exists in care across these different nations in first world countries compared to where I am at the moment in the Caribbean and also in Africa. So I think that this really sparks my interest. I decided I want to dedicate myself to fixing this gap, plugging this gap, and being a part of the solution. So I think neuroscience is just allows me to put all my passions together. So I'll definitely say that's been my journey so far.
Thank you for sharing. And next we have Chi.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thank you so much, Black and Neuro, again for the invitation. Very kind. So before I start sharing just like a little bit about my own journey, I really love the way you all honored the lands that you've joined this conversation from. And so I would like to also share that I'm joining you today from London, but I do so as a very proud British Nigerian and member of the African diaspora, because my scientific journey has been shaped by communities across Africa, across Europe, and the United States, where I work and live now. But I want to start by acknowledging the indigenous and ancestral knowledge systems, all of the communities and the elders across the many places that I've had the privilege to learn, to work, to collaborate with, because much of what I know and much of what I think we all know about brain health, about resilience, about community, about neuroscience has been preserved through generations of lived experiences. And so I think that our field has much to gain by listening to and learning from those diverse ways of knowledge. So it's a real privilege to be part of this conversation. And I love the question that you're asking around, and just the responses to see how different people have stumbled or intentionally come into this space. So mine is a little bit of both. My journey has also been quite personal. I don't think I actually just chose neuroscience. I think it chose me through my experiences. I would say I started off in med school at Manchester University. And I grew up in Nigeria. Well, maybe I should take a step back. I grew up in Nigeria, then did training in the UK. I was in med school at the University of Manchester. And during, as we have this intercalated degrees where you have the option of continuing on in clinical medicine or branching off into the sciences or intercalating, doing both a medical degree and a science degree. At that time, I was being mentored by just the most amazing, incredible human being, Professor Nancy Rothwell. And she drove a really lovely red Ferrari, or was it a Porsche? But I knew I loved her car. And she just seemed like this fun, exciting neuroscientist. She was one of the first people to discover kind of like the proteins that drove neuroinflammation. And in fact, developed like a therapy for stroke-mediated immunosuppression. And I was completely in love with this woman. I was like, I need to be her at some point in my life. I don't know whether it was the Porsche or just her passion for the brain, but they all combined in just driving me towards a degree in neuroscience at the end of the day. But also personally, I'd already witnessed firsthand how where somebody's born can really influence whether they receive a diagnosis or treatment or even hope for conditions affecting the brain. I had say, for instance, while working with Nancy, we're working on clinical trials. So even though we're doing mechanistic studies into trying to understand, the drivers of stroke-related immunosuppression, it was really translational where we had interactions with patients as well to see how some of the work that we're doing in the lab translated really nicely into clinic and patient benefit. And so I went on to do a PhD in neuroscience at the University of Bristol because I became incredibly fascinated about not just, from a degree in neuroscience, understanding how the brain works, but real curiosity around how it impacts not just in normal functioning, but also in disease process. And so after my PhD in neuroscience, I went on to, it was a case studentship where there was an element of industry industry work where I had the privilege of not just diving into the science, but also doing like a drug discovery and drug discovery and development pathway as well, to understanding how we can start to try to synthesize or develop treatments or therapeutic strategies for some of the conditions that we're working with, mostly the cognitive disorders. I did a postdoc at Imperial College in London in neuroepidemiology because I realized that I also wanted some sort of human interaction as well in my work. So interspersing the lab with some sort of clinical and human-centered work, and then got into faculty positions in the US where I am now. And the journey just took me from just studying like biology to starting to lead precision brain health programs, which I do now across Africa, Europe, and North America and the United States. And my work really now focuses on developing scalable tools for early detection, understanding resilience. So what are those factors that drive protection for against brain illness? And then also starting to improve and develop contextually relevant dementia prevention strategies so that we can really make sure that the populations that have historically been excluded from neuroscience research, particularly populations living in low middle income countries, are no longer left behind. So that's really my journey. I think I spent too long describing it, so apologies. I do talk a lot.
No problem. Thank you for sharing about your journey, and we'll end off with Marilyn.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone. I'm so Black in Neuro. So I'll just dive into it. So for me, my journey into neuroscience actually even started before I knew what neuroscience was. I think not my think. So in my first year in university, I was studying zoology, but I got interested in psychology because I really wanted to like understand myself. So I was always trying to find like the connection between psychology and zoology, and I think that got me to like reading around these different topics, and then I started to see how different people from different fields could come into studying the brain, and I think that was what encouraged me. And in my fourth year, I had my supervisor who I picked as my supervisor. So I told her what I wanted to do. I wanted to study cellular neuroscience, and she told me to read about on dementia and cerebrovascular disorders. I mean, that might look little, but to me, that was like a direction. So I began reading around disorders, around these disorders, also trying to learn about different disorders. And to me, at some point, it really wasn't even about me anymore. It was more about like the disorders. And around this time as well, I was also interested in genomics, trying to get on projects in genomics as well. So I remember I was working on a project with a team, and we're trying to compare different risks. And the thing was, it was very difficult getting enough data for Black people, and it was very frustrating. So I think what happened at that time was it started making me to go around to read on why this happened, and then I also realized that the same thing was on the brain data. There was also an underrepresentation of Black people. So I think all of this together kind of directed the way I wanted to ask my question. So I wanted to like ask my question in the way that I was going to be putting like African context in whatever it is I was trying to research on. So that's it for me.
Thank you all for a little bit of background of what your navigational journey looks like as you pursued your career in neuroscience. And our next question for today is really about this topic today. What does building research capacity across the diaspora mean to you personally? And I'm going to start that question off again with Natasha.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So two things come to mind for me, and because of two different experiences. So the first thing was when I was in my PhD, I co-founded an initiative called Visibility STEM Africa because I was often the only Black person African within the spaces I was in. So I don't think I mentioned, but I did my undergrad in Cyprus, my master's in the Netherlands, and then my PhD in Luxembourg. So often I was the only one, and I was getting just feeling very alone in ways and that people couldn't relate to my experiences. So I started VSTEM essentially to create community for myself, but obviously for everyone else. It was, and through that, I think there's actually people that I know that are involved in Black in Neuro that I met around the time that VSTEM was happening. So, and that was really great because then I was able to meet other Africans who are on the continent, in the diaspora, and actually start to form relationships, connections. And it was very interesting because some of the connections I made while I was still in Luxembourg are now good friends that I had by the time I moved to the UK. And so that was very impactful because it also meant when I moved to the UK, I had not only friends, but like a research community, which really meant something to me as well as somebody who had historically often been the only one. And then the second thing around building research capacity around the diaspora is related to the public engagement work that I did. That was also born out of kind of a similar thing of seeing a lack. So I'm a lab researcher and I became more and more acutely aware about, I mean, we all know this, but most of the data sets that we work with, most of the samples that we work with, especially depending on the institutions that you're in. So obviously I'm in the UK, predominantly white European ancestry. And the further on I go in my career, I'm just like struggling to justify working in this space if that doesn't change. So one of the things I decided to do was do engagement and reach out to Black communities. And some of the work that we're doing is also in empowering the communities themselves. So we do like dementia education for people from Black heritage backgrounds that they can then go into their own communities. So also looking at building research capacity, not just with researchers, but also with the community themselves. And so we have these community champions that can then go and spread the word about dementia awareness. So I kind of see it twofold as well. I'm really seeing a lot of, getting a lot out of also looking beyond just academia and researchers, but also how we can get people within the community involved in research. So those are kind of the two things that came to mind. And it's been really interesting exploring kind of those different avenues of how to build research capacity in different ways.
And I'm going to pass it right on to Thomas.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Great question that is. I'd say for me personally, um, when I was in the middle of doing my PhD, through one of those difficult dark days, it dawned on me that there are a thousand and one other people that uh, had back in my junior high school and so on, who could also equally be here doing this work. So for me, when thinking about building research capacity across the diaspora, I see it as getting the kind of collaborations, which means that individuals who, for example, are pursuing their undergraduate in Ghana, are pursuing their masters in Ghana, and for one reason or the other, do not want to travel out, cannot travel out, and so on, aren't necessarily then meaning that they cannot also engage in the sort of like world-class neuroscience research that we all aspire to do, to just really ask very interesting questions and be equipped to answer it. So for me, what that means is just creating those bridges, those connections, where you have individuals across different spaces that are willing to collaborate, and not only willing, but actually putting the work beyond the rhetoric. So it's always nice to see individuals who, for example, are maybe trained in Ghana but are now working in the US, or trained in the US but decided to move back to South Africa, or just that whole mix of it, because it ends up being a very collaborative effort where we are circulating ideas, circulating resources, circulating experiences. And that's one of those things that I think is very important. That's collaborative approach and sharing experiences so that we can move the overall global knowledge collectively together. That's what that looks like to me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we'll also ask the same question to Dr. Okiko Oluwa.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a great question. When I was thinking about the question, I think for me, research is a very important tool to push the field forward, to improve access to care to patients, leading to better outcomes regardless of where these patients are in the diaspora or back home. I think that when you think about capacity building tools, one of the strongest tools that you can have is research. Because first of all, research helps you identify a gap. Once you identify the gap through your research, you can figure out the how and the why, and then you can find out the solution. So for example, we know that about 90% of stroke-related mortalities happen in low to middle income countries, and Africa actually has the highest prevalence, 20% of that prevalence. So research shows us that there is a problem. Okay, what is the cause of the problem? Then we dive in and we see that, okay, patients don't have the same access to care. There's a lack of infrastructure. And then this can begin to inform our decision-making and policy-making, as well as helping to train and inspire the next generation of physicians and scientists, who can all work together towards fixing this problem. So I think that with research, you're able to build collaborations, you're able to build a network, and with these collaborations and networks across different countries, we can all come together, hands on deck, to work towards finding solutions that can help bridge this gap. So when I think about capacity building and actually making a change and moving the needle forward, I think that research is a very important one, and we can all bring that knowledge back home.
No, I agree. That was a great insight. Dr. Momo, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question, actually, really thinking about building research capacity across the diaspora. And here it's something that I had quite a lot of experience with over the last few years. So I had the wonderful opportunity to do a neurology fellowship at the UCSF. It's the Global Brain Health Equity Fellowship, and that completely transformed my life. I would say it was one of the most transformative events of my career. Because it taught me beyond capacity building, it taught me the importance of accompaniment. And so for me, capacity building is not just about training people or doing research, it's about creating sustainable systems that continue to thrive long after your grant or your research question or even yourself as the initiator of that endeavor has actually gone. So a lot of the collaborations that have historically happened with African institutions where I work or the South Asian populations, because my lab is in both across Africa, but also in Pakistan, a lot of the collaborations that have traditionally worked there have focused on just generating data and then extracting those data or samples to address questions. And now we're realizing that we need to move beyond that model towards real scientific partnership where you're not, and it's a term that I sit on a lot of study sections and I write a lot of NIH grants and have been very fortunate to be successful with them. And I try to keep in this key of a concept called reciprocal innovation. And that's where I think we need to be heading towards, where it's not just about us building capacity in a low middle income country, but thinking about the knowledge systems that work in those systems, in those areas that can actually benefit the global north as well. So it's really reciprocal and it's taken away from that understanding of, oh, we need to give into here, into these spaces because they're low resource, but realizing that there are things that work in those areas that can also be very useful and beneficial for high income countries. And that leads to a lot of respect, that leads to innovation and leadership that is equitable for both parts. And that philosophy I think it really underpins a lot of the work that we're doing in my group. We're not just investing in training or establishing infrastructure like, with the labs that we're building, but we're strengthening infrastructure and creating opportunities for scientists, not just in the low resource settings that we work, but also scientists who are from underrepresented backgrounds in EU or my lab in the US to lead global research rather than just simply participating in it. And I think that the diaspora has an important role because especially when you work in the diaspora, you have a unique position. Because many of us understand the realities of working within health systems or in areas where we're usually a quote unquote minority, but we still have some access to international scientific networks. So I see us as acting as bridges where we're bringing knowledge, resources, and opportunities, not just in one direction, but in dual directions, so that it's benefiting people in the areas that we're working with within those low resource areas, but also in the diaspora who are from underrepresented or minority communities. And so that's really the legacy that I'm really driving or hoping I can contribute to in some way.
That was really beautiful. Yeah. And oftentimes, like you said, it's very one direction, and we're thinking how we can build capacity in those countries. But I think thinking about ways that we could also adapt some of those methods and knowledge is, I think, really key information. So thank you for sharing that. And lastly, Marilyn, I know you are also involved in education and capacity development, especially with Coxsey Africa. And so I wanted to ask you the same question of what that means to you personally.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I would be talking in from the perspective of a young researcher. So I think building capacity building for me, I think it would involve creating like an environment where we young researchers can grow. We're able to ask like very, very meaningful questions that relate to our community, and also develop very independent thinking. And as I'm trying to use all of this to address like different challenges that we are facing in our community, because I believe we can learn the skills, we can have like numerous trainings, but if we're not able to find how to use those skills, how to find them to be relevant to answering questions relating to our community, we're really not doing something great in that aspect. So I think, and when I'm saying community and building an environment, I'm talking about more trainings, not just trainings evolving like just short trainings evolving like within our country, trying to travel to different places where we can learn skills that we're not able to get within our local communities. So it's for me.
No, that was really great. And it goes to show that, at every career stage that we have, specific things that we look out for. And I think we can learn a lot from our younger scientists as well. So your input is definitely appreciated. Moving on to the next question. And so far we've heard from many of you that you've built careers that connect neuroscience to equity, to global health. And so I wanted to ask the question of when you first realized that your work could have an impact beyond the lab or the clinical setting, and what were some of those first steps that you took, as well as resources that helped you, so that, for those of us who are trying to do and follow your footsteps, what are some steps that we can take so that we're not overwhelmed and that we're actually taking practical steps to hop on that as well, and with the same order. So starting with Dr. Mwanigwa.
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I'm being completely honest, I think part of the reason I started doing a lot of public engagement the last like 2-ish years is because I didn't really feel like my work was having impact outside of the lab. My work is very much discovery science, molecular mechanisms, proteins, and it's great and I love it, but it's also still quite far removed from, even drug discovery or clinical stuff. It's very preclinical, which is important, but then because of that, sometimes it feels detached from people. And so I've always enjoyed engaging with people. And so honestly, I just decided beginning of last year, end of 2024, to just start going out to talk to people. I'm also fairly new to the UK, so I also just wanted to understand what is the experience of, I work in dementia research, I work within the UK Dementia Research Institute, but I wasn't seeing much representation of people from Black heritage backgrounds. So I just started volunteering for anything where I could be around the community to actually understand what is the lived experience of people with dementia in the UK. And it was very eye-opening, but also having those conversations just also opened my eyes to that there was a massive gap there, and that not that many people are actually doing this work to be out into the community, actually understanding what that looks like. Because one of the things that I also realized the more I started reading and looking into research is that people from Black backgrounds are disproportionately affected by dementia in the UK, but then they also grossly underrepresented in the research. So seeing that gap, I realized that this is something that, as also a Black researcher and someone with a vested interest, I'm a Black person, I'm African, there's a big African diaspora here, big Caribbean diaspora here, there was this gap. And so I think that really, really motivated me to start saying, okay, how can I start to tap into this? How can I connect with the community, understand their needs, what's missing, where are these disparities? And as a researcher, how can I start to build the relationships with the community so that in the long run, my hope is that eventually in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I'm actually able to do research with samples and data sets and genomics and whatever from the African diaspora in the UK. But at the moment, I also understand that there's a responsibility to make sure that we're building trust with the community, which takes time. So at the moment, my lab work is quite separate from my public engagement work, and I think that's okay, because at the moment I need to focus on building trust with the community before I start saying, hey, can I have, your DNA or whatever, because we know there's a history of exploitation, of extracting from Black communities without properly compensating, using Black bodies, so that's kind of the thing. So for me, it's an interesting question, because again, I didn't really feel like my work was having impact in the way that really aligned with kind of my long-term interest. And so that's kind of the journey that I'm on now about how I can get there. And I see it as a long-term thing. It's not something that you do overnight. So yeah, that's my experience with that.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think that really goes to show that sometimes it's okay to have problems because those end up being, you know, the reason that you think about critically about how you can engage and feeling like your work didn't have as much impact as you would like, and that led you to really think more about how you can do something more community forward. And like you said, I also do molecular neuroscience, and so I think a lot about how, you know, it takes such a long time for work to get translated into something that actually impacts human health. And so doing this on the side and building other ways where you can give back through mentorship and other things has been really rewarding for me as well. So thank you for sharing. Dr. Tego, what about you?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. It's quite interesting because this dichotomy of my lab life and then my public engagement life, it seems to be something I'm also in experience. But it wasn't really a one moment, just a build up of it, and I'll share maybe four of them. Firstly, I think in the early days of my research and my studies, you know, it was like almost a discovery to me that, well, you sort of need to sleep if you need optimal brain function. And ever since then, it's been a thing where I'm like, okay, so I see so many students who then turn up to exams and you can see that they try to study into the middle of the night, and it's like you are shortchanging yourself trying to do this, right? It's like this should be common knowledge. Then someone when I was finishing my studies, I was looking at you know, what the science ecosystem looks like in Ghana. And there seems to be very little information about it online. And it seemed like, okay, so is it that people aren't doing as much public engagement? Is it science communication not that great a thing? So figured, okay, let's do something about it because it's things that I think are information that should be available to everyone outside of my sphere of academia. Then the third experience was when I decided, okay, let's do this. So beyond going out and doing outreaches, I started engaging in some writing within writing like pieces in the daily newspapers and writing blog pieces and so on. And then I had one where I was just um, received quite a lot of calls and messaging from this one article I wrote. And it's very often that you just start to think what you consider common knowledge isn't common knowledge to people who didn't study what you studied, haven't done the experiments you've done, haven't been to those conferences you've been to. So it's very easy to then share because you realize that you make minor adjustments to your life based on the knowledge that you have, but then that expert knowledge isn't available to a lot of other people. So then the last experience, which is now really cemented, it's for me to just accept that I really will have to live this dual lab life and always trying to also do public engagement stuff was, we went into a few senior high schools. So this are we teenage girls between the age of like, let's say 14 and 17, thereabouts. And just the feedback from something very simple as, trying to understand brain function. And so many of them are excited about it and aren't really sure what pathway to take. Many are of the understanding that, medicine was the only route to a neuroscience field. So once you see that there's such a gaping knowledge gap, it means people are making decisions that they wouldn't have made if they knew better. It just became, yeah, a very simple thing. And it helps that, I am of the firm believer that for many researchers, they love to talk about what they do. It's just finding the structures around it to do that many can't be bothered to do. So I then take it upon myself that, okay, let's create this platform. Let's have GA Scientific create a platform where we can then make it easier for researchers to get into the public spaces and just share because, we are all the better for it the more we know.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so we'll also ask the same question to Dr. Okikulowa.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think very, very interesting perspectives. I've learned a lot just by listening to everyone here. I think that as a physician, if there was any moment that struck me the most or made me really believe in the impact that our work could do, I think it was when I was rotating in England and there was an 80-something-year-old Nigerian female. She had actually just come from Nigeria to visit her family and she had a stroke. And she had a stroke and she actually had to be airlifted to the hospital and she came in severe stroke symptoms, high NIHSS score. And within a few minutes, 30 minutes, she was on the on the table in IR suite. She underwent a thrombectomy, and someone who came in with such severe symptoms the next day was walking in the ward. And I think that really opened my eye as to how geography can be such a big factor in determining a patient's outcome. And unfortunately, that's very sad, because if you look at, for example, Africa and the Caribbean, for example, the access to mechanical thrombectomy, which is the #1 treatment for ischemic stroke, the access is very little, if existent, right? So therefore, is a patient's outcome just based on their luck, their geography at the moment? Because unfortunately, if she was in a different country at that time, at that moment, she might not have survived. I spoke about the mortality from that earlier on. So I think that really informs the work that I aim to do with my career. And I know that the work I aim to do, it's not just even if it's just one patient that works helps, it's someone's brother, it's someone's sister, it's someone's mother, it's someone's family. And seeing her family and how grateful they were for the care, I think that's left a very big mark on me. So the next phase of my career, I'm going to be working on remote robotic endovascular neurosurgery to try and ensure that geography is not a defining factor for cases like this. So I would definitely say that that was the moment I realized. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really inspiring. Dr. Momo, how about you?
Yeah, thanks. And it's just been so delightful, yeah, to just hear other people's kind of like insights into those moments. I think for me, that realization came gradually. What Dr. Okikioluwa just shared really touched me a lot, because I lost my mom to a stroke, and honestly, it could have been avoidable. She was just visiting on holiday in Africa at the time it happened. So geography really has, a part to play, and that's really one of the drivers of the work that I do. But I shared with you around my experiences with the Neurology Fellowship during the Global Brain Health Institute, Equity Fellowship, and I think the defining moment was really when I started to recognize how profoundly neurological illness reflects social inequity. So as scientists, we tend to focus really on the biological mechanisms, right? We want to look at the genes or the biomarkers. But when you start to integrate social and structural determinants into your work, when you start to communicate with the community, with people with lived experiences of the disease, we start to see increasing evidence that show that brain health is really shaped by different, sometimes even modifiable factors like education, poverty, access to healthcare, environmental exposures, even like gender, but even culture and opportunities across the life course. And we've published quite extensively on this, and that's really shifted my thinking and really directed a lot of the work that I'm doing, because I realized that if our science is just confined to the lab, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. So you asked for some practical examples, and so I'm going to share those with you. One of the things that I did, even though it cost a lot to me career-wise, was I joined a lot of committees. And it wasn't just doing community-based participatory research or working within communities. I joined a lot of committees that were looking to advance brain health and brain protection for everyone, particularly those that were thinking about doing it for diverse populations. So one example, I'm part of the WHO's technical guideline development group, and we've just finally published risk reduction guidelines on how to reduce the risk of cognitive impairment and dementia that can be implemented globally in that working group. So the historical working groups of people who have been developing these sort of guidelines didn't have people who look like me. And so the discussions they were having were really for high resource settings, or people who, what I like to call, the minority populations, because if you think about where the majority of the world's population are, you'll see that they're actually in a lot of low resource settings. And so for me, as a practical step, is there's a huge need to have representation in the decision making and the committees that are shaping global decisions as to how we understand and how we implement brain health strategies. So that's one example. Another thing that I started to do quite intentionally is engage with policymakers. A lot of my work started off working with communities, hearing back from people with lived experience. That guided my work in terms of deciding what types of outcomes I should be looking at, what types of research questions I should be asking. But then I found that all I was just getting were papers. I was getting publications. I was getting promotion. It was great for my career, but it wasn't really great for the communities that I was very passionate about serving, because the work ended in benefits to me, not to those communities. And so recently I've started engaging more with policymakers. For example, we're working now on the first National Dementia Action Plan for Kenya. And I've just come from a trip to Nigeria to say to African leaders, you need to start driving because conversations around brain health agenda and showing them the disproportionate burden. I was at the G20 meeting in South Africa, in Johannesburg last year, saying the same thing to African leaders. You need to get on the table, and you can't just only focus on infectious disease, because neurological illness does occur here. It's not a myth, right? And so I think that there can't be just few voices, because it's always worrying to me, because I don't see a lot of people. I see so many brilliant, talented scientists and clinicians every day, but I don't see them in the spaces that actually have an impact when it comes to delivering change that's going to benefit their communities. So there's a huge, huge need. It is going to have some impact on your career because these are unpaid roles, but the long-term benefit is inestimable, in my opinion. And so I just always like to say that the greatest impact of neuroscience is not just about discovery work, it's about translating those discoveries into something that reaches and benefits the communities that need it the most. So those are some of my 2 cents on some of the practical things that we could do as a society, as a community, to really start to benefit the communities that we serve.
Thank you so much. And that really touches on some of the questions being asked in the Q&A on some practical steps. So yeah, thank you a lot for that. How about you, Marilyn? Is there any practical steps that you took in your own journey to bridge, capacity building, like you mentioned, or anything that you are looking forward to doing in the near future?
Okay, thank you. So for me personally, I would say one new thing I have done so far is joining the community COXI, where we are trying to bridge the gap of underrepresentation of genomics research in Africa. And one thing we are trying to do is we're not just trying to train people, we're trying to train beginners, people that don't even have enough knowledge on genomics. So that is the kind of approach that we are trying to use. And even with the lectures we are having, we are trying to look for people that we can relate with, not like the big names in the field. We're trying to look for people that can speak our language. So I would say that is one thing that we are trying to build in that sense.
That makes sense. Thank you a lot for that. Great discussion so far. Really has been very dynamic, and you all have very wide range of experiences, from clinical to lab to really engaging with policymakers. And so the insights are really appreciated. I'll transition into some questions that were asked in the chat. So Jordan Jackson in the chat has asked, technology has been a bottleneck for equality in research. Do you all have any ideas for technological innovations that would allow for more equitable research using modern technology, such as the Oxford nanopore sequencing technology, which has become smaller, allowing for more mobile DNA sequencing? And I think Dr. Okikoluwa has also mentioned working on robotics and things. And so any technological innovations that you feel pretty confident or positive about, or that you'd like to see in the coming years? And we'll follow the same order with Dr. Muanigwa.
Yeah, so I'm not working on this personally, but I'm recently established in collaboration with a lab that's based out of Switzerland, but they're doing a project called Diverse Brains. It's called Diverse Brains, and essentially they're working together with a researcher here at UCL, James Cole, I believe his name is, and they're developing portable low field MRIs that can be taken to basically different under-resourced settings, remote areas, different countries, because obviously MRI is super expensive, not very accessible. And I believe they actually have a group out right now using these MRIs in Zimbabwe, actually in rural Zimbabwe. So it's something that I'm not involved in that project, but when I heard of this, I was like, this is great, right? Having portable MRIs. So I think that's something that like definitely look it up. I think this is something that's promising and helpful in the field. If we can get some of these tools miniaturized, they can travel, they can go to places and still be used for diagnosis for, yeah. So yeah, I'll say that that's one that I'm quite excited about. So we'll see how that develops. I know it's still like maybe in the earlier stages, but sounds pretty promising.
Definitely, yeah. Dr. Tego, is there any technological innovation that you're excited about or feel positive about?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Jordan, for that question. See, I think it's great acknowledging that the technology is like can be a bottleneck not only to equality research, but just to research in general.
Mhm.
I think as a additional step from that is also the maintenance of said technology and being able to increase its lifespan per se. So I do have a colleague based out of one of the universities here in Ghana who recently has been doing a lot of work around photonics and optics-based work. So, there's the fact that the technology, like a microscopy, being able to use that efficiently ask the sort of research questions that can be asked and answered, which are related to very local needs and not necessarily global grand questions that need answering, but questions that address local needs. So through their work, they're actually looking at how not only to modify some existing microscopy technologies, but then also building the capacity of people so that if and when it does break down, being able to, service them and put it and get them back online to serve a need rather than now having to, get like a technician that will cost an arm and a leg to do or buy a whole new piece or so on. So I think there's great space around the microscopy work and individuals being kitted to be able to redesign these tools for purpose, but also to be able to repair when needed.
Mm. Wow, yeah, that'll be definitely great. Dr. Okikolua, how about you?
Okay. Thank you. I think if there's any technology I'm interested in, I think remote robotic neurointervention is a big one. I think that is going to be a game changer. Actually, this year, the Radis Lab, Dr. Vito Pereira, he did the first remote robotic thrombectomy in a patient in Panama, and he was in a different city. The patient was in a completely different city. The patient had a stroke. There was a robotic system on the bed. He was able to use joysticks to control it, was able to take out the stroke. Patient had a good outcome, had a good Tiki score. So essentially, that is a game changer. Because when it comes to strokes, every minute that you don't have blood to the brain, you lose a lot of neurons, and you have a lot of disability that comes with that. So I think that has the potential to be a real game changer where we spoke about how geography can really be a determining factor in the patient's ability to access care. If we have remote robotic neurointervention and we're able to build infrastructure, then that solves a lot of our problems. So that's definitely something I'm very excited about.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely goes to show how it's, really growing in technology, things that we couldn't have imagined even a few years ago are really becoming real. And I think the issue is making sure that those are also being accessible by lower and middle income communities, right? That's where the work in advocacy and engaging with the public really comes in. Okay, so Dr. Momo, how about you? What are you most excited about in terms of technology?
Oh, a lot. I mean, so I'm obviously in the neurodegenerative, particularly ADRD, so Alzheimer's and related dementia field, and a lot of my work is on addressing biomarker access inequity, because we know that the diseases, particularly dementia, a lot of the pathologies occur decades before people start to manifest symptoms. And so for me, early detection has always been a key. But then early detection does need availability or access to biomarkers, and a lot of the tests for detecting pathology are really expensive. So things like PET imaging, lumbar punctures, they need a lot of sophisticated infrastructure, and these resources are not usually available for much of the world's populations, especially in the low resource settings where I do most of my work. And so I've been really excited about the blood-based biomarkers that have been incredibly innovative for the field. However, yet these blood-based biomarkers are still not accessible everywhere, because if you go to a remote area, people don't have access to be able to collect venous blood samples. And so my lab has been trying to develop more scalable tools. So for instance, we're using dried blood tests. And then very recently, we've started to develop like saliva-based biomarkers for detecting ADRD, so Alzheimer's pathology, as a point of care screening technology. So this is really, really important to me, because what this does is it's not just exciting science, but it's also delivering care, and has such a huge opportunity for impact and bringing early detection, but also developing ways to monitor, because these biomarkers have diverse contexts of use. They're not just only for early detection. They could also be used to monitor treatment response, whether when you put somebody on therapy. And so we're starting to embed this a lot within our work. And for me, that's not just just exciting. I think it's really the future, at least for my field of dementia type diagnostics, is having cost-effective, accessible technologies that are available to everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And lastly, Marilyn, or I think she may have dropped off, and that's okay. Okay, so we'll go to our next question. And this one is actually something that I'm going back to from Dr. Momo's point earlier, on how we often talk about the scientific diaspora in terms of giving back, or a lot of times in the US and in the UK context, we talk about increasing representation, but like it was mentioned, the relationship is also reciprocal. And so I want to ask how any of the collaborations that you've done, or any of the work that you have done, how has underrepresented communities, or maybe even your countries and your cultures, how have they enriched your own science or your own work, and what can we learn? Because a lot of us tuning in today are from different countries, and so we want to learn about your own culture and your own country, and how the knowledge from your own community has broadened your perspective. So getting a little bit more personal. Dr. Mwanigwa.
Yeah, it's interesting because, yeah, for me, definitely, as I mentioned before, that the awareness of the lack of representation in the research really drove me to, to go into the community and actually do engagement work. Sorry, could you repeat the question? I just kind of lost my train of thought there.
That's
Sorry.
okay. I was more asking how your own experiences from your culture or country, how it has
Right,
broadened
yeah.
your perspective.
Yeah, I think so. Interestingly, I guess so I'm from Zimbabwe, and I think there's still a lot of stigma and a lot of stigma around mental health conditions, dementia itself. It's not always necessarily, like, some people don't recognize it as a thing. There's still like some mentality that it's a Western or it's a white person's disease. And I think part of that actually did motivate me to do engagement work, because it's like, again, there's a big African diaspora here, right? And so many of the people who come to the workshops that I run, they are from a couple from Zimbabwe, and there's some from Nigeria, and some people from Trinidad and Dominica. And it's really interesting hearing people voicing these concerns, and also some people coming and saying, hey, like, this dementia thing, like one of the most common things that people say is that, how come people basically saying that dementia only happens when Black people are outside of Africa, which we know is not true. but that there's so many interesting perceptions that people have around these things. So I think coming from Zim actually helps me because I can empathize with the perspectives, and I'm able to kind of like hold people's, like allow people to kind of come with whatever they're coming with, right? Whatever knowledge or lack thereof, and be humble about it. Try not to invalidate people's experiences and where they come from, but then also learning how do you toe that line of educating in a way that's not like minimizing people, but also bringing knowledge. So it's really interesting. But I think being from Zim and having these conversations back home as well kind of prepared me for the conversations I'm now having with people in the community and how to broach those conversations. But also it showed me, and I mentioned earlier, like that one of the reasons I got into this kind of into neuroscience was because of my mom. And because I have a parent with mental health stuff, I've also personally seen how misunderstanding of these conditions can be very dangerous and harmful for people with them. So that also kind of motivates me that it is really important that we're having these dialogues and conversations, but how we have these conversations is important because we want to bring people together. So having respect for people's cultures and experiences, but also figuring out how the best way to connect with them and educate. So yeah, that's my perspective on that.
No, that was really good. Thank you. Dr. Dago, how about you?
Yeah, great. Thanks. So I was smiling a lot when Natasha was speaking because there's some yeah there's some similarities in them. But curiously enough, I think it's changed my perspective on why we do research and what is the purpose of it. You know, once you get into or throughout your PhD journey, you start learning the process of research and you see all the accomplished people that have come before you, and then you now start looking forward to Nobel Prize announcements, like it's a World Cup or something like that. Then you think, yeah, that might be me one day, right? Working towards that. And then you start realizing that there's so much more to the science than that. There's so much more to in terms of how it can directly influence people's life and the application of it, and people being able to take that knowledge and doing something with it. So it really shifted the sort of questions that I started asking when I now had the, I guess, the authority to direct my own research. To now start looking at the sort of questions that are really near to people, the sort of insights that then has the shortest time from lab to bedside, actually influencing people in how they go about their lives, and also just understanding how to create the best research opportunities, regardless of any other bias and anything else around. So I think the engaging with colleagues in the diaspora, engaging with colleagues in other labs, in other parts of Africa as well, it allowed a certain perspective to really influence the questions like that. It's not purely recognition, but it's actually being able to influence and better people's lives.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting perspectives. I think in my journey, I think that my personal experience on how it's influenced the work that I aim to do. I think by seeing the lack of access to care firsthand. So I've seen patients, for example, who had brain tumors and couldn't get surgeries and had to wait for insurance to come through so they could be airlifted to a different country. For context, I schooled in Dominica in the Caribbean, and at the time, 2021, we were still working on establishing an active neurosurgery department, which meant that a lot of patients who had tumors could not be treated in the country, and then they had to go find care elsewhere. And then also in my second year of med school, I spent some time as a physiotherapy center rehabilitating patients with stroke. And it's very easy to just see a patient at the hospital and to discharge the patient, but you don't actually follow on their journey with them and how much work they have to do to be rehabilitated. It's months and months and months of grueling, intense physiotherapy just to try and bring them to the level that they were before. So I think that when I see this and then I'm able to travel and go to different places and I see the access to care that they have and how it looks like a miracle. Someone coming in, can't move, the next day they're walking. And I think this definitely strengthens my mission. And then to be able to, bring this knowledge that I've so or the skills I've seen back home, where it can be translated to actually helping people. Case in point, I was on a mission trip with the World Pediatrics Project here in St. Vincent, and we have no operating microscope, and we had a couple of equipment, but the team essentially had to bring in a lot of their supplies. Versus in high-income countries where they have 5, 6, 7 operating microscopes per center, So this is such a huge gap. This is such a huge disparity in care, and like Dr. Momo said, a lot of it, like research is important because it helps you identify the problem. So, okay, this is what we have compared to this. We have this problem, and what can we do to solve the problem? Can we collaborate? Can we train? Can we build capacity? Can we come together to find solutions together? And I 100% agree with Dr. Momo. I think that the answer is in holding the policymakers responsible. I think that is how we are going to make a difference. So yes, we can do as much work as we want to do, help save a couple of patients, but policymakers can change millions of lives. Well, you at the cutting end, you might save 1,000, 10,000 if you're lucky, right? So we do research to identify the problem, and now that we've identified the problem, we must hold our policymakers responsible until they do the right thing and help us bridge those gaps.
And I'll pass it on to Dr. Momo on this question.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Odesanya. And it's just lovely to hear all of the reflections. So, just thinking, it's funny, maybe because, even though I was born in one country, I've had the opportunity and privilege to live in several countries. So I actually call myself a citizen of the world. And that has really influenced how I think. But I just want to share, just thinking, if I'm thinking more from my background or where I grew up and how that's really shaped my science, but also the research questions that I ask. I think the example I get, so we all know that, well, most of us know, especially people working in brain disorders, know that a lot of the research, but not just brain disorders, many other conditions, most of the research has come from populations of mostly European ancestry. Yet, for instance, some of the populations that I serve, for instance, in Africa, we know that it contains the greatest human genetic diversity in the whole world, alongside incredible cultural, environmental diversity, even socioeconomic diversity. And so instead of asking whether the discoveries that I'm making, the discoveries I've made from the UK or the US, to see whether it can be applied in the South Asian communities that I serve, or the South American communities that I work with, or the African communities that I have my research in, I've started to really ask, how can we generate evidence that reflects the world diversity from the outset, so from the beginning? And that perspective has, led me to really look beyond just biology, because when I grew up in a culture where health is viewed quite holistically. Health is shaped by your family, your community, your spirituality. Everyone comes together, that wider environment, and that's really built a lot of resilience, and I've seen it firsthand. And so I go beyond just looking at biology and asking how, the different cultural systems or social determinants or lived experience influence both brain health and resilience. So one lesson that I've learned really is that when you do this type of community engaged or participatory type of work, you see that the people with lived experiences or your community, they're not just participants, they're experts in their own experience. So one example I like to give is, in the dementia field, we start to look at cognition as the most important primary outcome. But when I talk to somebody living with dementia or their care partner, they tell me that it's really the functional abilities, it's the behavioral symptoms, it's, wanting to be independent. That's what matters to them. And so I've really started to look at other outcomes beyond cognition. And I find that that has really enriched my own science, because I'm not just doing something to publish papers, like I like to give the example, but it's really things that will have an impact on improving health span for others. And so it's that connection, I think, to the African diaspora, I guess, that's really helped me to understand that, you know, when we're doing research, we need to really involve the people that we're trying to benefit from our research, and really involving them helps to shape the questions that we ask right from the very beginning.
100% agree with that. Thank you so much. Marilyn, in case you've missed the question, we were discussing how our own culture, or where you're from, where your community, how where you're from has broadened your perspective in the work that you do within neuroscience or policy or anything that you're involved in. What do you think your cultural background influences your work?
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry, my network was shaky. So yeah, I think from my experience, I think the other speakers have definitely mentioned all of this, is the fact that our different experiences definitely shape what we know. It shapes the way we ask our questions, and also it shapes how we approach these questions. And so this way, I personally believe that these are one of the things that can make us get closer to answering these questions, getting solutions. Because from different trainings I've had, I've seen that so it's not just biology people asking these questions. We have people from different fields, people that don't even have any knowledge on the biology aspects, but they have like a different perspective from their own trainings. So like just bringing them together, I think that those are the ways that we are going to be able to answer solutions that involve our communities, and not just our communities, also trying to build like an inclusive contribution to what we understand on brain health in general.
Thank you so much. Since we have a little over 10 minutes, I'm going back into the Q&A and choosing this question that is more related to career. So this anonymous question says, for someone interested in combining neuroscience, African ancestry, and food science to explore how culturally relevant food and plant-based approaches may influence brain health and disease like depression and dementia, what advice would you give on building a career at this intersection? How can trainees identify pathways beyond the traditional lab and clinical roles to pursue interdisciplinary careers in neuroscience? And you can unmute whenever you want, and we can go in any order, or anyone who wants to chime in can go ahead.
I think I'll give it a go. Curiously enough, I was in the middle of typing an answer to that question. So let's just give the short version so that I see if others can jump in on it. I think there's definitely a pathway, so that's sorted out. And there's definitely a need for it because a lot of your mental health disorders now are also considering looking at purely non-pharmacological interventions. So aside from your hardcore pharmacology drugs, and the alternatives, whether it's food or experience or exercise and probiotics and all those things combined. What I then say is really it works best if it's a collaborative approach. So finding someone who's already, or at least shows that they are interested in this sort of place. And without knowing exactly where you are based, at least the global neuroscience conferences that usually have a very strong sort of like a presence of researchers from Africa and so on. You are talking your SFN, ISN, and then IBRO, the IBRO World Congress as well. So this may seem like a plug, but at least next year, the IBRO World Congress will actually be taking place in South Africa. So then if you are really looking for, and that's next year, September, if you are really looking to do that sort of research, which requires a heavy African input, that may be a great place to, put in the calendar, see if you're there, because then in looking for specific researchers, you can better see the pathway that will work for you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the resources. And we can also help spread any conferences and anything that you think would be helpful to the community using our Slack channel. So we'll definitely be happy to do that. Anyone else has input on this?
Yeah, I could just share just briefly, just because my research really focuses on modifiable factors for dementia, and we really built a lot of sort of multimodal interventions that incorporate nutrition as well. I want to say that and thank you so much, because I think you've gotten the practical examples in terms of going to the conferences. I do think that because I always like to be practical and say, if you're gonna go into this type of field, alongside identifying a mentor, also think about like grant funding that you could start to apply to support this research agenda. And with the recent WHO guidelines that we've just published, diet is definitely something that we talked quite critically about. I think that there's a lot of understanding on how there's a lot of gaps on kind of like the diversity within different nutrition and nutrient profiles from different cultural heritages have an impact on brain health. One key gap that I like to think about, and just thinking from a biological standpoint, is thinking about the gut-brain axis. So if that's something that you're amenable to, I'd be happy to share my contact, because we have several opportunities. Because I'm part of the Worldwide Fingers Trial Leadership. So this is doing dementia prevention trials across over 72 countries now globally. So we have incredible data from different people over the world, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of participants, and looking at how dietary factors, particularly brain healthy dietary factors, have an impact on dementia prevention. So there's a lot of resources and consortium that you can join that will give you access to that data, so you don't have to do primary data collection, and it will allow you to really build responses that will then help you with your career in terms of advancing to the next phases.
Thank you for extending that opportunity. I think that's one way that we're already showing, collaboration, even across a virtual platform like this one. And so really thank you for that. Maybe one last panelist, if you're able to share on interdisciplinary careers before we move on to one or two last questions.
Okay, I think I would like to just add something. I would say personally, I think you are in the right environment right now, because one thing about this is like, for instance, Dr. Momo has already shared some potential opportunities for you. So I think one thing I would just add is, for me, when I see that I have an idea and I'm not getting it around me, I try to do some research around it, try to look for webinars where people are talking on these different topics. So when I engage in them, I'm able to know the kind of people I'm to contact. So I think you're in a good place right now. So that's what I would just be adding.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions on autism as it relates to the African continent. Someone said that they would love to understand the genetics and neuroscience of autism, and if there's anyone here that's working towards that. And also if you guys think Africa has a gap that is yet to be bridged in this research area.
So I'll jump in quickly with that. I'll say yes, there is a gap that's need bridging. Partly is because that a lot of the current studies those that aren't necessarily looking at the biology of it, may be looking at shortening the path to diagnosis, but then there isn't really work that's trying to consider, in the absence of these formal diagnoses, right? What then can teachers or parents realistically do, because they are often the ones who start suspecting this neurodivergence before they even think whether the child should go get diagnosed. So there is a huge research gap in that regard. There are actual active players within the field. I can speak for Ghana specifically. You have quite a lot of centers that are involved in providing service, but then they're really looking at service providers and in terms of support for children with autism, and of course their families and so on. And then much of the research in the area has been really to be able to paint a picture. What is the reality on the ground? And that's very important, not to be overlooked, because it's in having good quantifiable numbers of the reality and what are some of the phenotypes that we're seeing that can then now drive the research question of, are all the genetic variants the same? Are all the risk factors the same in all of these cases? So yes, it's a huge gap, and there's ongoing work to step in and start filling it. But there's always room for more. So yeah.
So do you mind if I also just share a resource? I'd like that person to check out the Precise Network. So there have been several studies across the African continent. I know Kenya, I think Gambia, and either Botswana or South Africa. They've been doing incredible work on ASD and other neurodevelopmental disorders. And they've been looking at mother-child diets and following them up all the way from pregnancy through to development of ASD to identify early biomarkers and other pathways for early diagnosis. So if that's something that you might be interested, it's led by a professor in King's College. The name has escaped me, but if one of the Black in Neuro people contact me, it's in my emails, because we actually have a grant under review for the Welcome Leap Forum, where we're trying to expand this into other African countries.
Thank you for sharing that resource. As we're wrapping up, I would like to ask one last question that's more futuristic looking. And so as we look towards, the future of neuroscience and building all these connections and really taking into consideration all of the tips that you guys have given us, what's one last thing that you'd like to impart on us? Any collective actions that you think we can take as community, especially as Black in Neuro? A lot of the organizers are tuning in right now, and obviously members of the community. And so what do you think is one last thing you'd like to say as a collective that we can do to really work towards a better future? Dr. Natasha?
Yeah, I think one thing that would be amazing, I'm sure it's happening in some to some degree, but being co-applicants on grants, I think there's probably a lot of us who have overlapping or similar interests, or may have just synergies, or even things that don't necessarily seem like synergies, which might and maybe opportunities. So I think I think the Black in Neuro platform is great to look people up, see who's there, if they have something like a research interest that you have, reach out to people. People are really willing. I find people are often very willing to collaborate and work together. And I think it would be really beautiful to see much more, collaboration across countries, continents, working together to build that research capacity. So yeah, I think more co-led grants across this community and beyond, I think will be amazing. I know it's happening to a degree, but I definitely think there can be more.
Absolutely, yes. Dr. Tago, one last thing that you'd like to put on us?
Yeah, sure. I think it's some sort of knowledge and awareness-based intervention. So what I mean by that is very similar to what Natasha was just saying. Creating a space where people can find who they are looking for, right? You have a range of students who may be applying for a PhD across Europe and the US and so on, and you need to find a supervisor, and you don't know, you cold email them, they may or may not respond. But there's some space that they know, okay, I can find a supervisor here. Or someone in the US who's putting together a grant, but they need a collaborator in a specific country, and they know, okay, here's a database I can go in. These are individuals who have put themselves forward, that they are open to these spaces. And I think you may find pockets of this in various associations and societies across the internet. Having one that, for example, Black in Neuro owns will almost feel like a bit more homely. You're like, yeah, okay, so this is where I can really get that sort of access to people to then be able to collaborate towards a shared goal. Thanks.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. If there was one thing I'll probably say believe that you can make a difference. I think that's very important because sometimes when you come from an underrepresented background, it's very difficult to actually believe that, what the work that you can do can actually make a difference in the world, but it can. And power of one, impact of many. So I would just encourage everyone to start small, dream big. If you're interested in like neurosciences or in research, find someone that has a lab around you, go spend time with them. If you're interested in neurosciences, neurosurgery, go to the operating room, go see a case, and just look for mentors that can guide you on the journey because representation matters a lot. And finding people who look like you can vouch for you, they can definitely act as a soundboard to you on your journey. So I'll just encourage everyone to keep dreaming because the world belongs to all streamers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're at time, so actually I unfortunately have to cut it short, but it's been a real pleasure hearing from you all, and I'd really like to extend my sincere gratitude to each of you and to everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation, and we really hope that you are feeling inspired and that you reach out to someone whose journey resonated with you. If you enjoyed the Neuro Across the Diaspora event today, please continue on with Black and Neuro Week by attending Neuro Careers tomorrow, where we have more panelists sharing how they can become a global asset in neuroscience. And please visit our website and register to become a member if you haven't done so already. And with that, thank you so much to everyone, and we hope to stay in touch.